You see, my son is 4, and I'm 26, and his mother. And he told me this morning that his ghost brother had told him that he has to kill me. Let me start this out by saying that my son does not watch graphic TV shows, nothing violent. He is a dinosaur-loving kid, and mostly watches Land Before Time and occasionally Jurassic Park/World movies with me and my fiancé. We recently just bought our house, about 2 months ago now, and I started to notice little things, but nothing that sounded like warning bells. I've lived in haunted houses before, so I just went on with my day and essentially ignored it, until one night around 11:30 I heard whistling. Now I live in the Appalachians, so whistling at night is a big no-no in my house, so I call out to my fiancé and tell him to stop whistling in the house because he will invite spirits in. He comes into our bedroom and I say to him, "Why the hell are you whistling at night?" He goes pale and says, "But I'm not whistling." I'm thinking he's messing with me, so I say, "Yeah, okay, go to bed." And the next morning I'm in the shower, and he comes in and says, "Be honest with me. Were you pranking me last night?" I, of course, tell him everything that happened and assured him I was not pranking him. He's a skeptic and always has been. He again goes pale and just says, "Okay," and drops it. Nothing happened for about 2 weeks until around 3 nights ago. I was on a phone call with my cousin, and I heard a loud crash. My fiancé works the night shift, so I immediately go into protector mode and assumed someone was breaking in, as that's how loud the noise was. I'm still on the phone with my cousin, and she is witnessing everything that's happened, and I call out asking if anyone is there. I know I'd be the first one killed in a horror movie, but if someone is in my house, I wanted to know that I was coming and unafraid, even if I was. I get to the bottom of the stairs, and at first, I see nothing, so I'm starting to feel less on edge until I walk out into my kitchen. That's when I noticed a candle. The 3-wick one that you buy at Walmart. It's halfway across the room. I look at the entry table where I had it sitting, and a painting I also have there was knocked over. So my first thought was, okay, the house is settling, and just knocked over the candle, no big deal. I picked it all up, and got it set back to where I had it, and thought it was strange that it just mysteriously fell over, especially since I have a 4-year-old who runs all over the house, all of the time, and the vibrations of that hadn't knocked it off. So I decided I'd test to see what it would take to make it fall. I'm running, jumping, doing everything to try and get it to fall the way it did, and it's not budging. I even hit the table and it still didn't fall, so of course I'm a little spooked, but decided to just go to bed. Last night as I'm falling asleep, I heard loud banging coming from downstairs. Of course, my fiancé is working again, so I have to go down and check it out for myself. I go down and get a very unsettling feeling. All of the hairs on my body are standing on end, and I feel like I'm being watched. I don't know what came over me, but I said out loud, "I don't care that you're here, but please stop doing these things when I'm home alone," and turned to walk up the stairs. You know that feeling when you have to run up the stairs because it's like someone is chasing you? That's the feeling I get. I turn around and say it's enough, and that I will not be scared in my own home, and walk to my bedroom. I continue to hear things during the night, and my cat is very on edge, and she's acting as if she were guarding my bedroom door. My son, about an hour later, wakes up and asks if I will turn a movie on for him so he can fall back asleep, so I do. Instead, I hear him mumbling in his room, as if he's talking to someone. This is not abnormal for him. He has a very big imagination and loves playing and coming up with his own worlds, and creates stories that go along with them. About an hour ago, he's sitting with me, and looks at me straight, and with a straight face says, "Mummy, my ghost brother says I have to kill you, but I would never do that because I love you so much." And now I'm completely in shock as to what to say to him. "What did you just say?" And he repeated what he said. I then prodded, asking for more information. He has been going through a phase where he's been more defiant, but then again he's 4, so I don't think anything of it. But he tells me his ghost brother tells him to break toys, hurt animals, stomp on flowers, and he wants to pick for me. My son is very kind and empathetic, and him saying all of these things is extremely out of character. He is the kind of child who wouldn't kill a bug because their family would miss them. So I'm at a loss. I'm not sure if this is a made-up fantasy or if I should be concerned. I come from a long line of people sensitive to the paranormal, so experiences are something I'm familiar with, but not to this caliber. I'm worried for my son's safety and well-being, especially if it's something I cannot protect him from. In order to appreciate this story, I should probably give you a little bit of context beforehand. I saw and heard strange things throughout my whole childhood. They could probably be described as shadow figures crawling down my stairs, a tall pale woman standing in front of my bed, as well as someone calling my name. I'm pretty sure all of this was just my imagination, since I was a young girl who was obsessed with scary stuff and was often left home alone until late at night. I was paranoid and stressed out by a lot of what-if questions. We lived in a very small apartment, mostly made of old wood, so it creaked a lot and made plenty of noise. However, I believe our apartment was haunted. The apartment next to ours was just as strange. My neighbor actually passed away in there, and none of the other neighbors noticed for weeks while her son, who had a very serious disability, was still in the apartment with her corpse because he didn't know how to call for help. The woman who moved in after them lived there for only a few weeks before she completely disappeared without taking any of her stuff, not even her dog or money. I lived in that apartment until I was 16. After that, we moved into a 3-story house, very modern, in a nice neighborhood, and this is where we get to the main part of the story. My new room is on the top floor next to the storage room, and my very own bathroom. I finally felt safe. Everything I had imagined in the old apartment seemed to have disappeared, and I finally stopped feeling paranoid. Until one day, it must have been around 11 p.m., my family was already asleep, but I was craving a snack. So I walked down the first set of stairs from my floor to the second floor where my parents' bedroom and a walk-in closet were. As I walked down the second set of stairs, I could see our living and dining room with a door that was separating the hallway and kitchen. As I looked at the door, I saw a woman peeking up at me from the door before she quickly pulled her head back. She was ghostly pale, had wide open eyes, and a big stretched smile, and long stringy hair hanging down when she peeked. I froze. Surprisingly, I didn't feel scared. I stood on the stairs for a minute and kept telling myself that I simply must have imagined it. Obviously, there was no one in the hallway, but that moment has haunted me ever since. That was a year ago now. I'm 19 and I haven't seen her since. Still, every time I walk down the stairs at night, I am afraid I will see her again. It was especially scary because everything else I had imagined before had been so obviously unreal. I usually always saw see-through humans with no face, but she felt real. A real face with wrinkles and pores. I'm not the type of person to believe in the paranormal, but I've started reading about this type of peeking ghost. Am I going crazy? Or am I genuinely being haunted? I am a scientist, logically driven, and I don't believe in ghosts, the paranormal, or anything like that. I'm usually of the mindset that if I can't explain something, I just don't know enough about it, or I can't measure it properly to analyze it. I had this bizarre experience that keeps rolling around in my head, and frankly, I'm embarrassed to even discuss it with friends or colleagues because it seems insane. Now, I'm an avid runner and will sometimes run into the evening or even at night to get my mileage in. I live in a Midwestern suburb that encompasses lakes and multiple wooded areas, and it's a beautiful place to run. It's got a dedicated path that goes on for miles. This path actually runs analogous to the houses for a few miles, so I'm not alone. People live there, and even in the dark, half of the path is lit from the light of the homes. I had a run a few years ago, in the dark of summer, where I was running past the houses. On the right of me was neighborhood houses, and to the left of me was tall grass hiding a pond. As I was running, I was stopped by this orb of light, literally bouncing in front of me. It came out of the tall grass and bounced on the path itself and into the grass of someone's backyard and back on the path. It was just this bright white light, perhaps the size of a softball, and too big to be considered dust or a bug. It just kept doing that, bouncing back and forth, but not in the way light bounces. It looked like it actually bounced. And it wasn't a light that someone shines from a flashlight. It was so incredibly bright and somehow appeared to have density, if that made sense. It also came from the grass, almost rushing out, so it didn't appear like someone was controlling it from any of the houses. And if someone was in the tall grass, ticks galore. But the light wasn't impeded by the grass at all. Light tends to dissipate the further out it is from the source, but this was bright and bouncing. It absolutely terrified me. I was only a few miles in and turned around and ran home. I was just too afraid of it. I have never hallucinated. I wasn't exhausted. The houses behind me were lit. Even if it was dark out, I could still see fine, and I had enough to eat, drink, and I was sober. Admittedly, my eyes aren't the best, but I had my glasses on and could see, and I can close my eyes and remember exactly what it was I saw. But I find myself still thinking about this moment with the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. I was too afraid to think about snapping a photo, so I just ran back home. I guess I'm curious if anyone else has had any experience like this, and what you've made of it. As a teenager, I used to babysit for my cousin Alyssa. I must have been about 16 at the time, and she and her husband Mark had just moved into a large house with their newborn daughter Emma. The house was newer and much bigger than what they'd lived in before, and even though nothing was obviously wrong with it, I never liked being there alone. I told myself it was just because it was an unfamiliar place, but I think in the deep recesses of my mind, there was something else that I couldn't quite put my finger on that caused my disquiet, though I had no way to vocalize it at the time. But one morning, I was at the house by myself with Emma, while Alyssa and Mark were out running various errands. She was only a few months old, so most of the time I was simply feeding her, changing her nappy, or simply being present and keeping her calm, when she wasn't asleep, of course. The house was completely quiet, and there came a point in the day while I was upstairs when I heard what sounded like someone moving on the staircase. It was distinct enough that I stopped what I was doing and started listening. I could make out footsteps going down the stairs, followed by a loud bang, and then a low murmur. My first reaction was to attempt to rationalize it. I told myself the house was new and probably settling, or that maybe I had left the TV on or something. I tried not to overthink it, but I picked up Emma anyway and decided to go downstairs to check. Now, the layout of the house was pretty open. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a large living room on the left, where there was a TV sitting directly on the floor, since they hadn't set it up yet. To the right was the kitchen area, which was partially visible from the stairs. Everything looked normal when I came down. The TV was off, and nothing seemed visibly out of place. I went into the kitchen to make a bottle for Emma, and while I was standing at the counter, I got a very strong feeling that someone was watching me. It wasn't tied to any specific sound or movement, so I can't really say what it was, but it was just a wave of general uncomfortableness. I kept turning my head slightly, expecting to see someone standing behind me or in the doorway, but there never was anything there. I was just letting my imagination get the better of me, I thought, and I began packing a diaper bag in case I wanted to leave. Less than a few minutes later, the TV in the living room suddenly turned on by itself. The volume was all the way up, and all I could make out was loud static. It startled me enough that I jumped. Emma began crying immediately from the noise, and I rushed into the living room and turned the TV off. My hands were shaking at that point, and I didn't feel comfortable staying there any longer. I called my other cousin Samantha, who lived nearby, and asked her to come and pick me up. I was trying to explain what had just happened while holding Emma and keeping my voice steady. While I was still on the phone with Samantha, the TV turned on again just like before, and that was enough for me. I grabbed the diaper bag and went straight outside with Emma, and did not go back into the house after that, and waited for them on the front lawn until Samantha arrived, and then we left. Later that evening, after Alyssa and Mark were back, Samantha, another cousin of ours called Rachel, who's Alyssa's sister, and I, went back to the house so I could drop off Emma and pick up the things I had left behind earlier. By then I had mostly convinced myself that there had been some rational explanation for what happened, even if I personally couldn't get to the bottom of it. When we got there, the house looked normal from the outside. We went up the front door and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. We waited a moment and rang it again, and while we were up standing there, we started hearing movement inside. It sounded like multiple people running up and down the stairs back and forth. We could hear voices too, like people talking and laughing, but it was hard to make out anything specific. At one point I saw someone move past the front window, and it looked like they turned their head towards us, like they had noticed we were there. That made all of us assume Alyssa and Mark were inside and just ignoring us for whatever reason, but that didn't make sense. So we rang the doorbell again, louder this time, and started calling out to them. Samantha knocked on the door. Rachel began raising her voice, asking what they were doing. The sounds inside persisted. If anything, it sounded like whoever was there was still moving around and laughing, like they were not answering on purpose. A few minutes later, we were all pretty much done. It genuinely felt like they were messing us for reasons we didn't know. So we gave up and walked back to the car. And as we were getting in, we saw headlights coming down the street. What do you know? It was Alyssa and Mark pulling up in their car. They parked in front of their house, and all three of us just stood there for a moment confused. When they got out, it was obvious they had only just returned. They asked why we were outside, and we asked them who was in their house. They said no one had been there all day. So we explained everything we had heard and seen, starting with the footsteps, the TV turning on, the running upstairs, the voices, someone at the window. They looked just as shocked as we were. I've never had anything like that happen before or since, and I don't really believe in anything paranormal, but I still can't explain away what happened at that house that day. My girlfriend and I moved into a haunted mansion in the Philippines, which happened to be her childhood home, which had been empty except for the upkeep, made for the past 7 or 8 years, and my girlfriend warned me about her plenty of times, and to be honest, I was excited for my first possible encounter. Now that it's happened, I'm utterly horrified. Imagine looking out of your barred 3rd-story window and seeing a woman's face quickly duck out the way. This happened to me a week ago. I didn't wake my girlfriend up, but I told her about it in the morning, and she was uncomfortably nonchalant about it. I got an "I told you so," and that was about it. She haunts a few specific spots. She creeps outside the upper story windows on the east side of the house, glides past the windows on the balcony, and has been spotted on the 3rd floor hallway. I saw her in the hallway while heading to the bathroom for about half a second. What freaked me out most is that she looked precisely how my girlfriend described her, with a long white flowing dress, medium length, straight brown hair, a pale face and a slack jaw. She was moving towards me quickly when I saw her in the hallway. She was looking directly at me. She was coming for me. It was then that I blinked and she was gone. I noticed it was bizarrely cold for a night in the Philippines. Anyhow, I'm here for another 3 or 4 months. If any more sightings happen, I'll be sure to update you. And I'm going to ask my girlfriend and her siblings for any of their childhood encounters. From at least of the time of my great-grandparents, our family have been experiencing things too numerous to list, so I'll concentrate on a couple of stories from my childhood, and one from when I was 18. The first odd experience I had was around age 8. We were living in a 2-story apartment. I woke up one morning and went downstairs as I usually do. The TV was on. My mum was laying on the sofa watching it. She makes me breakfast, and after eating, she lays down again. I sit and play for a few minutes and notice my mum is asleep. So I go to the kitchen and pull out 4 kitchen chairs and place them in a square. These are your classic wooden chairs with open backs, and I throw a blanket over the top to make a fort. The blanket, though, only goes about halfway down the backs of the chairs, and I sit there, wondering what I can do in my cool new fort. That's when I notice something zoom by. I could see it through the back of the chair. I'm startled and a little scared, but I sit there for a moment and think, what if it's nice? I quietly get out of the fort and look around. I feel like something is there, but it's hiding. At least that's what I was thinking. In typical childish thinking, I thought I'd lure it out with some cereal, so I go to the kitchen to grab a box of Captain Crunch. But where should I lure it? The stairs. That way I can get a good look at it. So I place a piece or 2 of the cereal on each step. There are about 8 steps leading up to the small square landing, then another 4 to get to the top hallway. After laying my trap, I hid behind the wooden banister. I sat there for a good 5 minutes, and eventually started thinking that nothing was going to happen, so I give up. But before I could stand, I heard a crunch and immediately looked down. At the first step, there was something hairy about the size of a child on all 4s but covered in fur. It proceeded up the stairs, stopping at each step up to eat the cereal. Then it dawns on me. I'm upstairs all alone, and this creature is coming up here to me. My dad's at work, my mum's asleep. What have I got myself into? I stare in horror. It's almost at the landing, only a few feet away, and I'm scared to death and scream for my mum. Before I could think, my mum was running up the stairs asking what was wrong. I don't know, I'm scared. Miffed, she holds my hand as we walk down the stairs. I notice the cereal on the top half of the stairs, but the rest are gone. Where did the creature go? Did it just disappear? This frightened me for about a week, and I didn't walk upstairs alone. To this day, I have no idea what it was. We had no pets, and it was definitely not some stray waltzing into our apartment either. But this apartment was off. It was the mid-80s, and our bathroom at the end of the hall was really old. It was an old, white-style bathtub with feet. I loved taking baths. I had gotten a Kinder Egg with a helicopter you could put together, and for some reason that little toy became my favorite, as I could take it apart and pretend it crashed, which I was doing this particular evening during bath time. As I sat there playing, I saw a male figure out of the corner of my eye. This scared me, but when I looked, there was nothing there. Then all of a sudden, I got a sensation of extreme fear that it was hiding on the other side of the bathtub. I sat there with my little helicopter for a moment, trying not to think about it. Then I saw it again, and this was enough. I jumped out of the bathtub, slipped and fell on the tiles, scrambled to get up, and run butt naked downstairs and tell my mum that there was a man in the bathroom. Surprisingly, she takes me seriously and goes upstairs to check. I'm sitting wet on the couch as she comes back down. There's no one there. We go back upstairs and check. I just feel so off as she dries me off like, it's still here. And I don't think I took a bath alone after that, in that apartment. We ended up moving only a few months later for other reasons. During the move, we were between houses, and we moved to another state. We stayed in a hotel/apartment kind of place. The living room was the bedroom. It had a small dinette, then a long hall with a sliding mirror closet, doors alongside one side of the hall, then at the end to the right, there was a small bathroom. We had just come in from having eaten out, and I really needed to pee. My mum walks into the dinette to put some leftovers in the small fridge, and I start walking to the hall. But I stopped dead in my tracks. There were human arms, octopus arms, and other things reaching out from the walls. But I really had to pee, so I closed my eyes and ran past it. I realize this sounds out there, but I've only personally experienced a handful of things, and these were the absolute standout experiences. Could I have been hallucinating? Well, I guess it's a possibility. But in the next story, I wasn't alone. Let's fast forward to the year of 1999. I was huge into mountain biking at that time, and only a few months until I turned 18. My friend and I decided to go trail biking in a place I had once biked before. This was in the backwoods of backwoods, in Forsyth, Georgia. We parked the car, grab our bikes, and put our wheels on. We head down the north road, and to the right I notice a dilapidated cemetery. It was old, I'm talking real old, and we continued our biking for a few hours. We see some old ruins in the woods and check them out. It starts getting dusk, so we head back. We drive up past the cemetery now on my left, when I see something and yell out for my friend to stop. We both see it. In the very back of the cemetery, in front of an old headstone, there was an absolutely beautiful orb about the size of your average basketball. Inside the orb were two oceans clashing with each other. One ocean was blue and the other purple. I was in a trance. I had never seen anything like that in my life. I feel no ill intent. I wasn't scared. I was simply mesmerized by the beauty. I proceeded to get off my bike and tell my friend to check it out together. But his reaction scared me. He didn't believe in the paranormal or anything like that. So seeing his reaction to whatever this was made me jump. I hopped back on my bike and tailed it out of there. We got back to the car, which was only about 115 feet away. He's in a hurry. I break down my bike and throw it in the back. He drives rather quickly out of the area and I say, "Dude, we should have checked it out." And he says, "I'm not messing with anything I don't know what is. It could be anything." But again, that orb, in spite of the clashing oceans inside, felt so peaceful and it was very pretty. I've never seen anything like that again. I would love some feedback to any of these theories on any of these stories, even if it's just a logical debunking. I appreciate you listening. I was just getting around to sharing this story, and I genuinely wonder if anyone has had similar experiences or any explanation for this. This happened when I was 13 years old, and going through an extremely dark time in my life. I'm 30 now. You see, I came from a really bad family situation. Abusive mother, absent father, a lot of messed up stuff. I was smoking a lot of weed at the time, mixed up with pills, severely depressed, and wanted to no longer belong to this world, and had attempted to remove myself permanently multiple times. Mentally, I was in a horrible place, and honestly felt constantly tormented. I also ended up at that messed up school from the Netflix documentary. The Program, if anyone has ever heard of it. I mention all of this because part of me has always questioned whether I was just so mentally messed up at the time that I hallucinated these experiences. Well, one night, I woke up to my Jack Russell Terrier growling at the end of my bed. He was sitting stiff at the very edge of the bed, staring into my room and barking/growling. The best way I can describe it is a three-dimensional shadow figure walked across the middle of my room. It was shaped like a normal man of average height and build, but completely black and more like a shadow, not transparent exactly, but not fully solid either. I had a nightlight in my room, so I could see it clearly. It didn't look at or acknowledge my presence at all. It simply walked, arms naturally moving, across my room and straight through the wall. I could see past the wall, through the doorway into the next area of the house, and whatever I saw did not continue walking but literally just vanished. The second it disappeared, my dog immediately stopped growling and went completely quiet. Oddly enough, I don't remember being terrified at that exact moment. I think I was in such a state of shock that I just mentally acknowledged what I saw and somehow went back to sleep. It wasn't until the next morning that the fear really hit me. I had another experience around the same time, maybe 2 weeks later. I was in my room softly playing guitar through my amplifier. I fell asleep in this bed with the guitar on my chest, and I suddenly woke up to what sounded like this horrible low demonic chanting/growling. The sound was coming from the amplifier. I know that sounds insane and maybe I was half asleep, but I swear I heard it. I panicked so badly that I ran downstairs and hid in the bathtub for hours. But the reason I believe the shadow experience really happened is because of my dog and some other weird things that happened in that house. My nanny, the only lady who lived with me in that house at the time, who was a very religious older woman, said she would hear my dog growling and barking late at night, but I never woke up before this particular time. There was also another separate incident where my nanny told me she distinctly heard what sounded like me walking down the stairs and jiggling the doorknob downstairs, but when she checked on me, I was completely asleep in my room. I've replayed both of these experiences in my head so many times over the years, wondering if this was sleep paralysis, hallucinations, was I psychotic from stress, weed pills, depression, trauma, or lack of sleep, or perhaps something else entirely. I'll leave it to your discretion to let me know what it was I saw, because I for one do not know. Let me start at the beginning. About 3 to 4 years ago, my parents got divorced. My mum moved out and bought a new house. I'll stay at this house every other week for 7 days. I got to choose my own room, and I chose the one in the attic. My room is directly connected to the laundry room, and it's not unusual to have wet laundry drying on a rack in my bedroom. I do not have the best relationship with my mum, since she gave me quite a lot of trauma and still refuses to acknowledge it, mostly due to her alcoholism, and she seems to still have a lack of empathy. I have accepted that, and mostly just say the things she wants to hear in order to avoid fights. And here is where the paranormal experience starts. When my mum bought the house, there were 2 mirrors facing each other in the bathroom. It was a hanging mirror and a medicine cabinet with mirrored doors. It gave me a bad feeling right from the start, and I asked my mum to cover it up. She said no, and told me I was overreacting. I asked multiple times since I got a haunting feeling every time I entered that bedroom. She still refused, and it took 2 years until she finally moved the cabinets to another wall. About a month after moving in, I felt an energy settling in my room. This was not a friendly energy, but not a that bad energy either. It's like the feeling you get when you're talking to your creepy uncle, but a bit worse. After the renovations were done, he had settled in my closet. He had come to me in my dreams, this tall, skinny shadow figure. I get the feeling of being watched every time I'm in my room, especially at night. By now, I have gotten used to this feeling. This house doesn't feel safe anyway due to my relationship with my mum. But it gets worse when I get into a fight with my mum, or was rude to her. This happens a lot more, almost every day, since I still had to learn how to say what she wanted to hear. Now, with more experience, it only happens every week and a half. The entity watched over me, like he was standing over my bed after a fight, and it makes me very uncomfortable. 2 years ago, my mum got a spinal cord injury out of nowhere. I wasn't home, so I can't tell you what happened in detail, but my mum apparently collapsed on the floor one morning and could no longer move her legs. My dad got her to a hospital, and she got life-saving surgery. She's disabled now and walks with a stroller, and it scared the crap out of me. I thought she wasn't going to survive, and it made me think a lot. Now, I don't know if the entity has anything to do with this, but I became more fearful of him afterwards, because the doctors couldn't find a reason as to why this happened. After she came home, the entity's energy got stronger. I would get sick after being rude to my mum and get nightmares, and this doesn't happen to me often, and I think this might be the cause of it. A few months ago, I got into a fight with my mum. I don't remember about what, and during the night I woke up to a loud bang. The rack with drying clothes had fallen off the door. This rack was really steady and far from the edge of the door. I didn't pick it up since it was really heavy with wet clothes and it was about 2 a.m. I had to go to the bedroom, so I stepped out of bed to the door. I tripped over the rack and it left a pretty serious mark on my leg, which bled a lot. The next morning, my dad helped me pick it up and hang it back up. We noticed that the legs holding it up were now bent, when they weren't before, and this was made of thick metal, so the fact that it happened at all was quite unusual. I am scared of this creature. I try to stay on my mum's good side, but she can get under my skin so bad. I do believe people can change, and I've even tried family therapy and talking about it, but it didn't work. I always feel like I'm walking on eggshells in this house. I just want my own room to escape. If everything goes according to plan, I will move out in a year for university. I don't know what I expect from sharing this. Perhaps I just need to tell someone. I don't feel safe in my house anymore. Does anyone have any advice? For a bit of context, this happened when I was 12 years old. I had just come back from a holiday in Cyprus and made friends with some guy. He and I were texting while this happened. To give you further information, my room at the time was quite small, and I had a high bed that was positioned right next to the windows. I also had a curtain that essentially had to be pulled to either side of the window in order to be opened. I was texting my friend, the one I told you about that I made on holiday, and both windows were opened completely as far as they could be, and my curtains were partially drawn. I was just texting when I looked up at my window as I heard the sound of my curtains moving, and they were. I gave it a cursory thought, but decided that it was probably just the wind. I brushed it off like I said, and that's when a few moments later, I heard a noise like movement on my bed, and as I looked to my left, I could clearly see the indent of something standing on my mattress. If I were to stand on my mattress right now, I would leave an indentation on it. Well, I could see the same indentation on my mattress, but there was nothing to cause it. Along with my mattress, the face of my teddy bear that was next to me at the time was also being squashed into the mattress. It was at that moment that I clocked exactly what was happening, as all the information was clicking into place in my brain. The curtain, the indentation on my bed. I was having my very first encounter with a ghost. And at the moment of realizing it, a sharp wave of pins and needles shot through my entire body. It started from my nose all the way to my bottom. I instantly got up and screamed my lungs out and ran directly into my parents' room. I don't remember much after that, except feeling extremely uncomfortable and nervous. I told my family what happened, and I didn't sleep in my own bed for ages after that. I was already quite a scared child and would always sleep with my door open and light on just outside. In fact, I didn't stop sleeping in my parents' room until I turned 14 because of this. And I begged my mother to get someone to help my room. I didn't really know what I wanted or asked for originally, but I think I established that I wanted a priest to cleanse my room. I begged for her to send someone, but nothing ever came of it. She said that there was no ghost in my room and that I was ridiculous. I was incredibly disappointed by this outcome. I even told the guy I was talking to from the holiday about it, and sent him a video of me asking my sister if what happened was true, though I no longer have the video as it's been a while. Now, I no longer sleep with my window open, ever. I have no explanation that comes to mind. I know I wasn't dreaming or that I hallucinated, because I was on my phone, and it was the distraction of this happening that caused me to flee of the room and even notice it to begin with. I don't know what to think, but I do know what I saw that day, and I think there is definitely something that I cannot explain afoot. Any help would be appreciated. I've had a few experiences over the years. Let's see what you make of them. The first one happened when I was around 11 years old at my grandparents' house. They had a finished basement that we used as a play area whenever we visited. I had been downstairs earlier in the day and left some of my toys down there, so I had to go back and grab them. Bear in mind I was completely alone in the house at the time. The basement had a section where my grandparents stored lawn furniture and other seasonal items. To separate that space from the rest of the basement, they had hung a large seat from the ceiling, almost like a curtain, to make a sort of makeshift wall. I picked up my toys and began heading back up towards the stairs. And as I was walking past the hanging sheet, something moved against it from the other side. The fabric pushed outward in a very clear shape. The way I remembered it, it looked like the outline of a person's face and upper body, with what seemed like a hand raised up near where the head would be, almost like someone holding up their hands in front of them. I stopped for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing, but nothing else happened after the initial movement. I decided not to go any closer. I turned around and went back upstairs, got the dogs, and sat outside on the front step until someone else came home. I didn't mention it right away because I assumed there had to be some explanation, but I'm not gonna lie, I did avoid going down there alone for a long time after that. There was another experience that happened a few years later in a different house where I was living with my mum. I was downstairs one afternoon completely alone in the house, and I remember it being silent, there being no background noise whatsoever. Well, there came a point where I heard what sounded like someone walking up the stairs. The house had 2 staircases, one at the front and one at the back, and they met at the same landing upstairs. When I heard the footsteps, I just assumed my mum had come home and used one of the staircases without me noticing. This didn't seem unusual at first, so I didn't react right away. A few moments later, I heard the front door open and my mum come into the kitchen, calling out to me like she usually did when she got home. But the timing didn't make sense. I asked her if she had just gone upstairs and she said no, that she had just walked in. That's when I told her what I heard, and she told me that she had something similar happen to her 2 days ago when she was home alone. She had heard someone walk up the stairs when no one else was there. I understand that houses can make noise sometimes with temperature changes and settling, but these were footsteps. The last set of incidents happened much later in a house I had recently bought. I was living there alone with my dog Max. One day we were both downstairs and I heard a loud crash from upstairs. It sounded like something heavy had fallen over, like a bookshelf tipping or a large piece of furniture hitting the floor. My first thought was that something must have been unstable and finally fell. So I went upstairs to check. The house wasn't very big. It just had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, so it didn't take long to look through everything. I checked both bathrooms, the closets, and even the attic access. Nothing had fallen. Everything was exactly where it had been. I went back downstairs and tried to brush it off as something explainable, even though I couldn't figure out what it could have been. Over time, though, the exact same sound happened again, at least 2 more times while I lived there. Each time it was just as loud and just as distinct. Each time I went upstairs to check, nothing was out of place. One of the last times it happened, I wasn't alone. A friend of mine called Daniel was over, and we had actually been talking about the noise earlier that evening because I mentioned it to him. While we were downstairs, we both heard it at the same time. A heavy crash from upstairs. So we both went upstairs immediately to investigate, going room by room to make sure we didn't miss anything. And just like every other time, nothing was amiss. No objects were out of place, and no signs that anything had fallen. I've tried to come up with logical explanations for all of these, and maybe there are ones. I just haven't thought of them. Let me tell you a story about when I went visiting Chicago on vacation. During the trip, I decided to take a train out to Michigan City for the day. It was late winter, perhaps early spring, and everything was still quite cold. When I got there, the mall I went to was almost completely empty. There were a few stores open, but hardly any people walking around. At some point, I decided to use the restroom. It was located down one of the quieter hallways away from most of the stores that were already open. Before I went in, I noticed how empty that part of the mall felt, and when I stepped inside the unsurprisingly empty restroom, it was completely silent. I went into one of the stores, and nothing seemed amiss. That's when, out of nowhere, I got this intense feeling that I was being watched. I looked around from where I was, but I did not see anyone. There were no footsteps or shadows or anything that would suggest someone else had come in. And a few seconds later, I heard a loud bang. It was very sharp and sudden, and I think the closest thing I can compare it to is the sound of someone hitting a laptop or a solid object against a tile floor. And because it echoed in the restroom, it was quite hard to pinpoint exactly where the noise came from. Right after that, my phone started to glitch. The screen began flickering, and the home button stopped responding completely. This was something I'd also never experienced before. It felt like the phone was struggling to function. At that point, I was already quite scared, and to make matters worse, I hear the sound of a stall door opening. It was close, not across the room, and it sounded exactly like the metal hinge shifting and the door moving. I turned, but nothing moved. The stall door, at least mine, was still closed, and there was no one there. The sound had been real. There was nothing to match it, and that was enough for me. I left the stall, got out of the restroom as quickly as I could without stopping to look back again. The hallway outside was empty just as before, but I didn't slow down, and I kept walking until I was back in a more open part of the mall. Within a minute or two, my phone returned to normal. The screen stopped flickering, and the home button started to work as usual. Later on, when I was leaving, I ended up mentioning the experience to an Uber driver, but didn't go into much detail. Told him where I'd been and what had happened. He told me that Michigan City had a reputation for that kind of thing. He says the area has bad energy, and a lot of people have strange experiences there. He talked about people reporting things moving on their own and hearing noises and electronics acting strangely, though I wasn't sure if he was just feeding into my fear or fishing for a tip. The only other time I felt anything similar was in Yuba City, California, where I had a separate experience that I could never really explain. Since then, I have also heard from a few other people who have been to Michigan City, and some of them described similar things. A couple of them mentioned they believed were poltergeist-type experiences where they were staying. And someone even brought up how their phone glitched, and I hadn't told them about mine. I can't explain what happened to me in that restroom, but I try not to dwell on it. I don't think I'm going to be going back there anytime soon. I own a wooden doll that predates the Civil War. She's stuffed with straw and hair. I've had her since 2020, and yesterday I tried speaking to her using a spirit box. I asked if there were any spirits attached to the doll, and two voices responded. One sounded like a little girl who said she was a 4-year-old called Juliet, and the other claimed to be a 5-year-old boy called Robert. Juliet was hesitant to give her name and said it was bad. They both said they passed away at 10:40 and described it as scary. As the session went on, though, they started contradicting themselves and giving answers that didn't line up. At one point, I asked if they knew I was chronically ill. Robert said no, but Juliet said they did. When my cat Pumpkin came over, Robert said he didn't like her because she meows too much, and even said, "Go away, cat." After that, I asked if they had ever had a cat. Robert laughed low and very unlike his voice had sounded before, and Juliet said they didn't. They also said they didn't know who Jesus is, or heaven, or hell, and they claimed to have never seen their parents since they died. Eventually, their voices stopped sounding like children, and I asked if they lied about who they were, and he said yes. Robert then started making condescending, almost playful remarks, and his voice no longer sounded like a child's. When I said, "They aren't very convincing as 4- and 5-year-olds," Robert simply replied, "Oh, really?" And after that, communication ceased altogether. We turned off the box and put a rosary on the doll. Right after we did that, Pumpkin started spitting and coughing, and then she stopped breathing. I shook her for a few seconds and she began breathing again, and she has never done anything like that before or since. We ended up putting the doll outside because I was so freaked out. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. We feel like we may have encountered a demon. Let me tell you about my paranormal encounters in the forest of Oregon. It's a pioneer cemetery, but it is the resting place of the last member of an extinct tribe. I'm of Choctaw heritage, so when I found out about her, I wanted to go pay my respects. I'm not from Oregon, but I moved there from Texas. I ended up meeting a guy who we bonded over creepy stuff, and I told him I sometimes feel stuff. Not always, but sometimes. He tells me his house is haunted and wants me to come see what's up. It took a few visits, but I ended up moving in with him when my life kind of fell to crap. The ghost was a man who shot himself after he lost his family in a fire, who loved cigars and brandy, so every night I'd pour him a little snifter of brandy. There was another entity there that was freaking nasty, and it killed my birds, smashed the cage bars and squished them. Anyway, Eliza Young, or Indian Eliza, was the last member of the Kalapuya tribe. We get to the cemetery, and I get out of his truck and get hit with this very ominous sensation. I ignore it and make my way to her, doing the cornmeal and tobacco offering. My friend points out the smoke is spiraling instead of drifting up. I go to leave, and that's when my body freezes. I cannot move. I start puking white foam and my body relaxes. I step back to her, puking, and then it stops. I leave and then it starts again. My friend had to carry me back to the truck. I was projecting that foam stuff and simply couldn't stop. He takes me over to a friend of his house, and they decide I'm like a trick pony and start taking me to places that have trauma or bad stuff happen. Sometimes things happened, sometimes it didn't. They only associated with me because of what my friend had told them and wanted to see if I could create the foam again. We were going to a park and ended up at a location where a guy had drug-related issues and ended up terrified of being shot in the eyes. We're going to this really cool historic house. Nothing bad happens, I swear. Turns out the house was once owned by a very bad person that abused children and died in hideous agony. They took me to a few places that had been used as dumping sites, and it got to the point where I refused to go anywhere with them after that. It super sucked, and I pretty much ended up leaving Oregon a few months later. The house I was living in at the time was fairly large, and the layout made it feel even bigger when you were alone. It was a 2-story rectangular house, and the way it was set up mattered a lot for how everything felt at night. Because you entered the ground floor at one end of the rectangle, straight into a lounge area. The entire bottom floor was mostly open, with tiled floor and a long stretched out layout. About halfway down on the left side there was a staircase leading upstairs. Because of how long and open this space was, parts of the ground floor would get very dark at night unless every light was on. Upstairs, the layout followed the same rectangular shape. At one end was the master bedroom, with another bedroom directly behind it. A hallway ran the length of the upper floor towards the opposite end, where there were 2 more bedrooms, one in each corner. My room was in the bottom left corner of that layout. Along part of the hallway there was an open section with a balcony railing that looked down into the lounge and sitting area below. The first night anything happened, I was home alone. My family was out, and I had the house to myself. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but as it got later, I started noticing movement in the darker parts of the house. Whenever I went outside briefly and came back, I would catch what looked like a shadow, shifting at the far end of the ground floor where it was darkest. It wasn't clear enough to identify anything specific, and I told myself it was just my eyes adjusting, or light from outside changing. At some point I went upstairs to my room, and as I reached the hallway and moved towards the balcony area, I glanced down into the lounge below. There was a faint amount of light coming from upstairs behind me, and right at the edge of that light, I thought I saw the outline of a figure on the floor below. It wasn't detailed, just a darker shape against the darkness, but it was enough to make me stop for a second. When I looked again more directly, there was nothing there. I went into my room and tried not to think about it. Later, when I was in bed, I started hearing sounds from downstairs. It sounded like doors moving slightly. Just a shift or a creak or a sway. It was clear enough that I could hear them, but not so loud that it immediately sounded like someone was in the house. After a while, I couldn't hear it anymore, and I eventually fell asleep. The second night I was alone again. My family was out for something related to my sister, and I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. The same general feeling came back as the night went on, and I noticed similar shadow movement downstairs, and I tried to ignore it the same way I had done the night before. When I went to bed, the sounds started again, but this time they were more active. I began hearing what sounded like footsteps on the stairs. At first, it was just a few steps. Then it turned into something moving up and down the staircase repeatedly. The pace was faster than a normal person would walk, and it didn't sound like it was slowing down or stopping at any point. We didn't have any pets, so there wasn't an obvious explanation for something moving like that. This went on intermittently for a few hours. I stayed in my bed, listening, trying to convince myself it was just the house making noise. Eventually, it built into a single sequence where it sounded like something ran all the way up the stairs, continued down the hallway towards my room, and then hit my door, loudly. At that point, I got up and checked immediately. I always kept a baseball bat in my closet, so I grabbed that before opening the door. I checked the hallway, the stairs, and the room nearby, but there was nothing there, and the house was still empty. The third night was a combination of what had already happened, but worse. I was alone again. There were shadows downstairs, sounds from below, and movement visible from the stairs. I was on edge. When I went to bed that night, the noises continued for a while, similar to before, and at some point during the night I woke up to the feeling of my bedding being pulled. It made me sit up immediately, but when I looked around me there was nothing in the room, and no sign of anything that could have caused it. And after that I didn't sleep much. I still don't consider myself someone who believes in ghosts or anything like that, and I've tried to come up with explanations for all of it, but I simply can't. I'm an 18-year-old female, and my friend and I were in Douglas Park. I have no idea where we ended up at the time, but we found a way inside a fenced-in lot at night through a small gap. Wherever we were at the time was huge, and as we wandered we eventually realized that we had lost our way of entry, and there was genuinely no way to get out of this fenced-in area. It looked like a construction site, all torn up debris and rubble in our direct area, and then tall grasses and shrubs mostly around us, and a big, main, vacant building further in the center. Then at one point we notice a girl appear from throughout the weeds, going down a crafted path. There were random paved footpaths throughout with no pattern or anything. The girl is around 30 to 40 feet away. Mind you, it's around 2 AM and she's wearing a white dress down to around her knees, and at first we're not trying to freak ourselves out, though the girl was prior making pace and walking down the path. She now sort of is pacing around the same area, and at the time I mentally acknowledge it, but was trying to keep myself from being irrational. My friend now is starting to get really anxious, so we need to sit down for a second. Don't ask why we turned our backs to it, I don't know, but when it occurs to me to check on where this girl was, I look behind us, and she was perfectly diagonal to us, and it starts to sink in. We're sitting on the ground with a solid view of where we are at this point, looking at the ground, and it just clicks. This has to be some sort of burial ground. The layout was a cemetery, with the rolling hills and soft, flat land, though the ground had been disturbed at some point. Lots of rubble. and it starts to sink in how messed up the situation was. It genuinely felt unreal, like a literal play-by-play horror movie, and it really solidifies that we know how hard it is to enter this fenced-in area. It's incredibly hard to believe this is just a coincidence, that this girl happened to be there too, in a white, flowy dress at 2 a.m. Now, the fact that she stopped directly behind us was genuinely unignorable, and we immediately stood up and tried to trace back to where we came from. As soon as we start moving, she does a full 180 and starts to follow us too. At a slow and steady pace, arms down and calm. We're absolutely starting to lose our mind at this point, not wanting to take it at face value but not really having a choice, clutching each other and starting at a fast pace in the general direction of where we came from. Though running would be the immediate thought, I really don't know how to describe it. Like it didn't feel real at all, and running would genuinely make it like a horror movie chase scene, which we were just trying to ignore as long as we could. All around us, for literally, it looks like it goes on for ages, are fences, and just in the state we were, it was impossible to scale those fences. There was no exit, the place was humongous and we had absolutely no idea where we were. It sounds so insanely stupid recounting it now, but when we were speed walking away, we did not look back for around a minute. But when I did, and now it is genuinely so engraved in my memory, but I turned my head for about a split second, and as I do, she, no joke, stops in her tracks and steps into the tall grass on her side, which has covered most of her body, leaving just her face poking out. And I swear her face was so eerie. I don't remember it, but more the absence of her face. When I saw that, and I don't believe in any specific religion, mind you, but I called upon whatever force would listen and just yelled at her, "We are light, we are love, and we're sorry if we trespassed, we are leaving, we are protected." I don't know. And I just repeated this while walking back. It's so hard to recount this event even though it was so recent. I can't recount exactly for my friend, but we were just holding each other so hard, and she was just screaming no repeatedly. Since then, I have lost my voice. I was genuinely screaming for my life. I have never felt as scared as I was in that situation. I believed my life could end at any moment, and for the thoughts that this was just a lady aiming to spook us, the way I was screaming for my life, directly facing this woman. And for the thoughts that this was just a lady aiming to spook us, the way I was screaming for my life, directly facing this woman, if she still continued to walk and pursue this prank, that lady was evil regardless. At this point, we're still backing up and she's actively disappearing into the bushes until she's gone. And my brain just scatters to where she could be if we can't see her, and our walk turns into a full-on sprint. It felt like any moment you could just be back. Where we're directed is lit up by a main streetlight, which kind of felt like the saving grace, as this whole fenced-in spot was primarily only lit by the moonlight. And we're just running along the side of the lit-up fenced-in area, and I truly believe whatever I called upon answered, because we found a hole in the fence and got our asses out. We didn't see her from the time she disappeared into the bushes to when we left. I've been online all day, trying to find any information on the area where we were, and it just kept getting eerier and eerier. The very large plot of fenced land was labelled Hanman Cemetery Hospital, which was only visible on Apple Maps, not on a lot of other maps I compared it to with little information on it. Though through the research I've done, it genuinely sounds like a place you would expect this kind of experience to occur. Camp Douglas, Lake Meadows, all right around that area where we were. I'm just trying to get any better understanding of what we saw, now knowing the vague history of where we are. I'm almost positive we were on old burial grounds, like actively standing on them when the girl appeared. I know how insanely stupid this whole thing was, and we won't pull anything like it again, but now that it's already too late, I genuinely just have so many questions and so little information. All in all, we were trapped in this fenced-in area for about an hour, only noticing her for around 10 minutes. Right when we noticed her, I took a picture. Honestly, my intent was to see if the camera would even pick her up. That's how uncanny it felt in the beginning. I really wish I had captured more. But like soon after the picture was taken, That's when I felt the life or death situation feeling. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you have enjoyed tonight's collection of paranormal stories. If you did, be sure to let me know down below. I also would like to let you know that I posted a video on Saturday, security camera stories. They are really fun stories, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's probably worth a listen. It's probably going to pop up on the in cards now. I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for your continued and unending support. It really does mean a hell of a lot to me, so thank you. And if you would like to sign up to get some awesome and extra perks, you can find the links down below and find out how to do so. Tomorrow I have some jail/prison stories for you guys, members and patrons, so be sure to check it out when that drops. If not, I will see you on Thursday, as we're going to be heading into the middle of nowhere. But until next time, guys, stay awesome, and good night.